This week on the podcast, we have Aly Wilkins joining us. Aly is an initiator, oracle, writer, and teacher of the ancient feminine. She teaches about matriarchal feminine psychology and how we can embody our full feminine spectrum to anchor the next age of light. Aly is passionate about supporting people embodying their soul blueprint through her work as an oracle in the Akashic Records and helping people reach their highest potential. She has written a book called The Sacred Wealth, which teaches the energetic pathways of embodied abundance, and also has a YouTube channel with free teachings focusing on the ancient feminine, soul mission, goddess consciousness, and soul nourishment. And I'm so excited to dive into this more spiritual / sacred conversation today. Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. Welcome back, Aly. I am so excited to have you back on the podcast again. For anybody who's missed it, Aly was on our podcast probably a year ago now. It's been a while. I'll put our episode in the show notes below so that you guys can go check out the first episode if you want. But this is exciting to have you back. I always love returning guests. And today we're going to dive into feminine energy and the multifaceted nature of feminine energy, which I'm really kind of curious to dive into. This is something that, has sparked deep interest in me, but it's something I don't teach and something I really like. I want it for myself. I'm interested in learning about this for me. It intrigues me, which I know so many of my listeners, you're probably in the same frame of mind of like, there is a part of me that wants to dip my toes into this, but where do I start? And what does this mean? And so, Aly, you're our lady. You're our lady of the hour to guide us through all this feminine energy and to help us to come home to this thing that's really about remembering something that's already kind of alive in our body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, feminine energy. Let's just start off with, what is it? What are we referring to when we're talking about the multifaceted nature of feminine?
Yeah, I mean, that's even a big question in itself because we can be thinking about that from many different angles. But the basics is we all have masculine and feminine energy. And we're taught about what masculine energy looks like, and we're taught about what feminine energy looks like. Just like, when you have a baby and it's like, oh, if it's a girl, we're going to dress her in all pink stuff, and her nursery is going to be all pink. If we have a boy, it's going to be all this. Like, there are these pre-thought out concepts of what masculinity and what femininity are. And from a very spiritual level, there are aspects of this that are more rooted in who we're being in each of those. So, for example, like the feminine, from a spiritual understanding, we know that the feminine is more open and fluid, whereas the masculine is really the one who is creating a safe container, who is more linear, who is more structured, whereas the feminine can be more chaotic. And by chaotic, I just mean like, I call this full spectrum feminine. Like, I didn't mean to drop my course that fast, but when I say chaos, we automatically think like, oh, that's stressful, that's too much. And it's not that. It's that so when we're thinking about feminine energy, just keeping it to the beginning part here before I just go full in, we've been taught that masculine and feminine energy look a certain way, but from a patriarchal perspective that isn't really in support of our highest good, of our fullest power, that's very limiting. So when we're looking at the feminine part of that, it's like, what have women been taught to be like? Nice, polite, good girl, non-disruptive, don't speak unless you're spoken to. If we're going back like further back, some of these things have shifted a little bit, and we've grown in this even in the last 20, 30 years so much. But there's still this expectation that like, oh, the woman is always just going to care for everyone around her in a sacrificial way. She's going to sacrifice herself and care about everyone around her. But this is leaving out a huge aspect of the feminine, which can be like unruly and like, no, I actually know what I want to do and I know how I want to do it and I don't need your input. Or some of these, the way that I'm describing it might be a little bit like harsh, but there's so many aspects of the feminine that have been pushed away from us as women and as girls that make us incredibly powerful. And I think that that's the reason we haven't learned it. So I'll stop there because I could go on for 1,200 hours.
But it's true. There is parts of us where we feel afraid of our emotions. We
Mhm.
feel afraid of our instincts. Like how many women have an instinct for something and then say, no, you know what? That's probably irrational, or that's probably not true, or we self-doubt a lot. Our sexuality, like that's a big one that's been really tamed with the patriarchy. That links back to that feminine nature, right? Of that fluidness that we're it's embedded in us. It's in every fiber of our body. So
Mhm.
yes, I would love, and I know I'm going to be opening up a big can of worms here. Like this is this I know could be like a whole course on its own, but I would really love to hear how you feel the patriarchy has really impacted and influenced women's, I don't want to say fear of their feminine energy, but has really kind of been like the block to us embracing this or to diving into these urges or sensations we have that we keep locked away.
Yeah, this is a really important question. And I want to preface this with a lot of the work that I do and the things that I studied to start talking about these conversations are things that happened at the start of the patriarchy, 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, looking at the rise of monotheistic religion, not just Christianity, any religion that is rooted in just a male god and the goddess has been removed. And during these time frames, there was very systematic programming that was happening to remove power from women because women used to be held in absolute reverence. They used to be worshipped essentially because people saw, wow, a woman, all of a sudden she's birthing this thing out of nothing. There's just a thing, her stomach is growing bigger, and then she has a life coming out of her. Like she must be God, right?
Like
So
it, like it.
right? So that's how she was treated. But systematically, it's kind of like if you think about if anyone might be familiar with like narcissists or how there's something called devaluing. And so over time, the patriarchal construct, which is very intertwined with monotheistic religion, they slowly over hundreds and hundreds of years devalued women. And we can see this very clearly in old biblical texts or old myths and stories which a lot of myths, by the way, are depicting the shift into the patriarchy where women are being raped and women are being harmed and women are bickering amongst each other, like myths are changed to reflect the patriarchal construct, or gods are raping other goddesses. Like, I don't think that's a thing for like real, anyways. But um, yeah, so there was this strategic devaluing. And we can see this, like I was saying, through biblical texts and through even things looking at, like you mentioned sexuality before, how we are taught to even look at sex. Women basically were viewed from the Christian church's eyes um, as tempters off of the religious path for men. So it's kind of like the only reason we're letting you guys be here is because you can give birth and we can't. We haven't figured out how to do that quite yet. And they made it seem as if women were completely purposeless. There was no value. All of our magic was demeaned, all of our power was demeaned. We can see this also through the dark goddesses, for example, Lilith. Lilith is the first wife of Adam. And a lot of people, I had never even heard of Lilith because I'm not really religious, and she's more talked about in the Jewish tradition as a demoness, which she wasn't. Um, but Lilith has been so demonized that she went from a protector of stillborn children, the person who is, or the energy that is moving a stillborn child through the veils and through the realms, helping them cross over. She went from that as one of her many roles to being an eater of children. Don't let Lilith in your house. She's going to eat your children every night. It was told that some of these stories, like now, we're like, that's crazy. But people legitimately believed this for hundreds of years. So another story with Lilith was that she would haunt, in quotes, men in their dreams at night. She would haunt them as a succubus and give them sexual dreams because they couldn't have just been having the dreams themselves. And at that same time period, um, if a man was caught masturbating, I think he would be killed or he would be like go to prison or something because it was seen as wasting life. Like that's how much stigma was held around sexuality, that it was like dirty and you only did it to procreate. Therefore, within everyone, like demonizing the primal sexual nature within us, making us all feel wrong and shameful. And there's a lot we can learn when we look at that time period. So for feminine energy, it's like the patriarchy and the religious construct has completely tainted our understanding of femininity and what femininity is supposed to look like. And that's why I'm like, let's just go back like 5,000 years and look at who was the feminine then. The feminine that was living in a world because she created it. And I don't mean she created it in terms of like, the origin story of Earth, but because women were facilitating power, sometimes inequality. It depends what time period we're looking at, but in a matriarchal construct where there's harmony and balance and not war. And there's essentially peace on earth, where the time of Eden, the time of like the golden ages, looking at that version of femininity and who is she? How did she behave? How did she act? How did she think? What was what was she like in different situations? How would she handle different things? Because basically, the versions that we've been given are Mother Mary, who has been church washed, is what I call it, into appearing as just totally peaceful, innocent, pure. She's never, in quotes, she's never even had sex. She's a virgin, right? That's not even what virgin meant back then. Virgin meant a sovereign woman that wasn't relying on a man, had nothing to do with her sexual activity. Um, so we have Mother Mary as one option of who to be. Like this is the model essentially for the wife. She's pure and holy and she's not even sexual. She's pristine. She does her duties. Takes care of the children. And then the other role is Magdalene, who there were actually many Magdalens, but Mary Magdalene, who was one of the disciples, and she was canonized by the Pope like 5 years ago, 2016, 8 years ago. Um, Anyways, she is the second option we're given that is basically the whore. And whore back then was actually a title of reverence. It was a title of this is a woman of power who is a representative of the goddess. So, but now we still are given kind of these two options of who are we going to be, the wife or the whore? And the wife, that option, it's like the husband's not even attracted to her because she's not sexual. And he kind of like wants her to be his mother. So there's like all sorts of distortion within that. And then the whore, it's like the man never takes her seriously as to be like a part of his family. So then she's sort of like abandoned and she's only seen for her sexuality. But a man like craves that. And the
Hmm.
truth is that we're all of it, that we're all of it. There is no separation. We're all of those things. And so the work with the ancient feminine is doing this really deep excavation of where have we suppressed our dark feminine, the aspects that the patriarchy have said, no, 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 you can't do that. You can't be this way. And for probably 1,500 years, women would be killed if they were showing these traits, or they would be exiled or socially ostracized or beaten by their husbands at minimum. Um, if we portrayed these different characteristics. So now it's like, okay, how does it that I can reclaim this in a space and time that most of us are safe to do so? Still, there's parts of the world that women are not safe to do this. But for those of us who are safe in the West to do this work, it's like, how do we bring forth these aspects that have been so buried for so long, bring them back into our own wholeness, learn how to understand them? Um, and that's a lot of the work that I do with women, practicing that, just offering a space where we have the ability to like spend some time in some of these ancient feminine ways of being. And then we're like, whoa, there's an edge over here. I'd feel really uncomfortable doing this, or I identified this belief system over here that I did not even know was there. And sometimes will take us time in each archetype or in each different face of the feminine to really understand, like, wow, I have not been being this way. This whole part of me has been pushed away. So,
And I would just like to add to that as well that, you know, these aspects that you talked about, and I loved how you've framed it, like these parts of ourselves that we're sometimes afraid to expose ourselves as, or to allow that surge in our own energy or in our own physical body to feel those things or to be those things, how it can be really scary for us. A lot of that is a holding pattern. And I think like this is taking me a long time to work around this concept of trying to really understand. Because I'm like, but wait, how? But what does this mean? And so I think a lot of women are where I was at one point of really not understanding that the witch burning years and how the patriarchal system and how it came into being and how it wiped out the feminine, it really has left ancestral trauma in our body, in our DNA. So this isn't just like a made up thing of like, oh, you have ancestral trauma. Like this is an actual scientifically tested thing. And I'm going to get the study wrong. So please, nobody quote me on this or or tell me that I was wrong because I know I'm wrong. But there was a study that was testing, I believe it was rats. It was either rats or mice with cherry blossoms. And so they would test them with cherry blossom, the smell of cherry blossoms. And every time they would give that scent, they would shock them. And so that they would feel pain. And so these mice or rats got afraid of the smell of cherry blossoms. It became part of their memory. And then those rats went on to have babies. Those babies were never exposed to any cherry blossom or shocking whatsoever. But whenever the scientists would introduce the smell to these baby rats, they would go into that trauma response of feeling it. And they actually even studied it further to see that, and this is where I'm going to get it wrong a bit. I believe it was that they had more sensory cells specifically designed to pick up cherry blossoms, like actually in their nasal capacity and in their brain. So parts of their actual molecular buildup was built so that they could sense cherry blossoms. They could have an advancement to sensing them because it was a danger for their species, is what it was registered. And then this carried on for generations and generations of mice from these original mice or rats that were tested, right? And so when we talk about why this is so damn important for women to learn about and why I think I'm so passionate about trying to understand it and learn about it is because there is shame held in our body. There is withdrawal that we withhold back from doing certain things or to be a certain way. We never think that we're smart enough. We have imposter syndrome. Like we live in this phase of fear, which is a lot of this ancestral trauma that we hold in ourselves because somewhere down our lineage, in order for the patriarchal system to come in to wipe out the feminine, the only way they could wipe it out was by putting fear in those that were expressing the feminine. And so that fear has become part of the DNA of our ancestors that in the modern world we are facing. And it is still, I think, in many ways, still really relevant. Like women still are afraid. We're afraid of being hurt. We are afraid of being challenged that we're not smart enough or we don't have a place at the table. Like we are afraid to express our sexuality because we'll be called a slut, a whore, whatever the case might be. So this, in my opinion, is why this is so important. And you kind of like really touched on that. But just so for anyone that's like, is ancestral trauma really a thing? It is. And this is why. And this is why this work that you're talking about, Aly, is so darn important, is kind of going back into the history.
yeah, that's so fascinating. And I love that you can bring that out in like a real scientific way that's proven. And, even so, I talk about this aspect a lot because we don't think about this. So, think about it's year 1600 and the local witch is gonna be hung. The whole town is required to come and watch. So imagine that you grew up in one of these towns. What are there, 500 people there max? They're not like the towns that we had today. So everyone comes. So this could be like you're seeing your second grade teacher being hung as a witch. And what did she do to be called a witch? When we actually look at the truth of what happened with witch trials, women were named as a witch for all sorts of things because the government or the church, because they were the same thing at the time, wanted the person's property. The property of anyone who was named a witch would go to the church. Like these are key facts that we didn't hear about.
Yeah.
Or because a neighbor was being tortured herself or someone she knew was being tortured and they said, you have to, who are your accomplices? And they would have continued to torture her if she didn't say. So she was named that way. Or maybe it's because she attended a birth, or maybe it's because she had herbs growing in her garden, or because she had long hair, or because she walked with a certain sway in her hips that was a little bit too sensual. So when you're talking about like these ancestral shifts, it might not even be from our own physical ancestors who things happened to. Everyone at the time was witnessing all of these punishments for women who spoke out, who were loud and proud for whatever their cause was or whatever they cared about, who dared to speak back to their husbands. And this is, just a few hundred years ago. But then when we think about I work with a lot of women who are priestesses and who um have so much crippling fear about showing their magic. And it's because for a lot of us, we were present in the temples when they were destroyed. And, 1500 BC, 500 BC. This really started around 3000 BC. That's when the patriarchal construct started to ramp up. And it's sort of the way that I've learned about this is it's kind of the example. I forget where I heard this, but I think it was in a book somewhere. They said, it's like if you were a lawyer and you had an assistant and you had this assistant start to deliver like lawsuits and stuff or information to your clients. But the assistant started to pretend like they were the lawyer. So then everyone thought they were the lawyer. And then they started to gain all of this power that they were just like it wasn't theirs. They stole it from the actual lawyer. They were pretending. And then eventually everyone else believes that this person is in power. So the real lawyer is kind of like knocked down a peg. That's kind of what happened for hundreds of years until it got to the point where then, okay, entire religions are being wiped away. When we hear in the Bible about, I think it's Aaron who Moses's brother, who Moses comes back from like meditation or something, and Aaron is leading the people with a large statue of a cow, and they're praising the holy whore of Babylon. They were talking about Hathor. And so then when you hear like religious talk or biblical text, or then it just turns into, Middle Ages and like 1200, 1300, 1600 vocabulary where everyone's like harlot and whore, like that initially was actually talking about the goddess. And so to
Mm.
see, what I was saying about these priestesses is like, we have such a memory of being dropped from the position of being like the highest of the high, revered and worshiped and honored and respected in a non-hierarchical way. From that space down to the gutters of like, we're pushing you down into the basement. We're going to set you on fire alive. We're going to burn everyone you love. And it is so traumatic to remember that. And so
Hmm.
that also, when we're talking about, why we might suppress these things, or because, like you were saying, there's so much tangible fear that so lives in us. What I found for myself and with a lot of my clients is that underneath that fear, once we kind of open that up, we will start to remember that feeling of like watching our entire livelihoods being taken away or persecuted or killed or all these things. And like that pain, I think is a lot of times what we're actually avoiding. Because when we remember that, it's just like everything shatters. And that's what happened for me. And that's why now I'm like, we are bringing her back. We're not going to be playing around with this patriarchal version of the feminine. And even like you can see this, a lot of the spiritual community now, I've just been really realizing and noticing and irritated by it that so much of it is very patriarchal and colonialist. And you can see this so much. I used to love polarity teachings. I worked with polarity teachings all the time about the masculine and the feminine and the masculine. These are his roles, and this is how we submit to the masculine as the feminine so that, we can be more receptive. And there's truth in all of it. However, a lot of these teachings are perpetuating the patriarchal version of femininity that we are just supposed to submit and that we are submissive creatures that are just designed to receive, which is true in some ways in the proper environments, but it leaves out this entire portion of femininity that's like, the fierce warriors who, like the Amazonians, for example, an entire tribe of women. People, just as a side note, people my whole life have always been like, you look Amazonian because I'm 5'11". And I always thought they meant like people from the Amazon. And I was like, oh, they must be really tall there or something. But there was actually an African group of women called the Amazonians that were the last tribal group of women to fight. They were fighting off with the Greeks. Around the time period of like Athena and Medusa, like around that time in mythology, they were the last feminine tribe to fight with the patriarchy. And so they fought really well. The Greeks had a very hard time defeating them, but eventually they did. And then it's like, okay, that's the symbolism then of the entire patriarchy rising.
Mhm. Now, by no means am I working towards trying to be a priestess, but I'm fascinated by the priestess training teachings, which is where we actually met, is in that arena where we are both in a training on the different faces of the 13 faces of the priestess. And I remember not knowing why I needed to be in the course. I remember my husband going like, "Why are we spending money on this?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's a calling. My belly feels it, so I'm going to do it." Um, and even the first session, I remember a girlfriend after our very first call on the thing, and she wasn't part of the program, but she called me. She's like, "So how was it like?" Because I was like, "I don't know why I'm doing this," and I was very open with a lot of people of like, "I don't know why I'm taking this. I don't know why I'm spending thousands of dollars on this, but I feel like I need it, and I'm just going to go with it." And so she called me and she was like, "So how was the first call?" And I'm like, "I am so confused. Like, I have no idea what I just walked into." And I said, "The only way, like, I don't even have words for it, but what I can describe is that I feel like, and like, because my family was not religious growing up, we did not go to church, but I was always very religious curious. Like, there was something in me that was always like, what is this about? Like, and our town that we grew up in was a small town that was a very religious town. So which little side note, reason why our family really wasn't religious is because my mom had me as a teen. And so our community really shunned my family. Like my mom, she started me off in a French Catholic school and pulled me after a week because of how they treated her. My dad was like, no one's going to treat my daughter and my wife this way because I was a result of a teen pregnancy. Like it was a very religious community, but anyways, so there's a part of me growing up as a teen. A lot of my friends went to church, and I was so curious, like, what is this thing? And I'd go, but I'd feel so lost. Like there was a part of me that wanted to understand it, but it was so, like, I just felt like I was being welcomed in, but I wasn't being given anything. Like I was like, there was a secret door I was not allowed to go past, pretty much is what it felt like this imaginary door, this veil that I was never allowed to know anything beyond this point. And so, and then I went to university. What did I do? My first year of university, I signed up for a world religion course because I was like, I need to understand this. Like, I still am so confused. And so I took this course and still I walked away and I was like, I don't get it. Like, I'm not, there's something that's missing. So I go into this priestess training that you were in, and my girlfriend asked me, and I was like, this is the first time where I feel like I walked through the gates of something and the willingness, like it was like I was opened to everything. Like it was like, and I don't even know what that everything is. Like I can't put words to it. I can't tell you what I'm learning. But I just, for the first time, I felt welcomed in, like I was ushered into something where it was like everything will be revealed to you. Everything is coming. And that's how it felt after that first call. So like I couldn't put words to it. I didn't know what it was still. I just knew I needed to be there and I could feel it with every fiber of my being. And it amazed me over the whole year that we were in that course together, how much remembering I had, how much welcoming there was of these different aspects of myself that I was like, ooh, that's related to this, but it's okay to be this. right? And so for me, coming into the priestesshood or the priestess trainings and coming into the goddess culture, like I hear what you're saying about how it can be really scary for some, but for me, it was like this awakening where I was like, now I have more compassion. Now I feel like even though I still question, am I enough or can I do this? I can do it. And then I use the wisdom that I was learning about the different goddesses and about the different priestesses to really help me feel comfortable in that, if that makes sense. Hey, ladies, if you're feeling stuck in the cycle of burnout, overwhelm, and just feeling out of tune with your body, I've got something transformative for you. Introducing Cyclical, Reclaiming You. It's a 9-month program designed to help you tap into the power of your natural hormonal cycles and reclaim the balance in your life. Whether you're juggling a demanding career, motherhood, or just trying to make time for you, this program is about syncing your life with your body's natural rhythms to create more ease and joy. Over 9 months, you'll be guided through hormone hacks, sacred feminine practices, and deep wellness tools to help you not just survive, but to thrive. You'll learn how to balance your hormones, prevent burnout, and harmonize your feminine energy so you can show up as the most empowered self. Ladies, you don't have to keep running on empty. This is your time to reclaim your health, vitality, and the life that you deserve and have dreamed of. Head to the link in the show notes below for the Cyclical program and sign up today. And as an extra special bonus, for this round only of the Cyclical program, I am offering a discount of 50%. This is a one-time offer that will never happen again. So make sure you go in and click on the link in the show notes to get this one-time special offer. Join Cyclical, Reclaiming You, and start living with intention. You are so worth it.
Yeah, like what you're talking about is because all of the monotheistic religions aren't talking about the feminine. And I had a very similar experience when I was young. My parents weren't super religious. My grandfather was a pastor, but I went to church and I was like a young child, like 5 or 6 or something. And I went to church with my parents instead of going to like the child, the thing you put your kid in when the parents go in. And I was like, they're lying. And I told my mom in the car, they're lying. I don't want to come back ever. And they were like, what do you mean they're lying? And I remember being mad, like
Yeah.
sitting there, and it was like a non-denominational church, like not, it wasn't anything they were saying. I was just like, they're lying, they're holding something back. And that's also this remembrance of like, okay, if we're only going to be talking about religion from the aspect of the masculine, that's another reason why the patriarchal view of the feminine isn't correct, because women are taught only from the lens of the masculine. It's like a man trying to teach a woman about having her period. Like, what do you there's feminine mysteries and there's masculine mysteries, and they're totally different experiences. And as we're talking about the patriarchy, a lot of people think that patriarchy is just about men. It's actually not about masculinity at all. The patriarchy is the complete removal of masculinity. And so it breeds weak masculine energy and weak feminine energy. And so for men as well, being trained, I don't want to be offensive in the way that I say this. So just like if something offends you that I say, just wipe it off. It's not meant in that way. But looking at the sort of men that are being breeded from religion right now, they're not really in service to being in their truest, highest power, where they are recognizing themselves as a god and a creator. In a lot of these cases, these men are forcing women to be submissive. And this is a generalization, but I saw this thing that I think will describe what I'm trying to say a little bit better. That was like, there's some statistic that young men now are being ushered in, like way more young men are being a part of Christianity than ever before or something. And someone was saying, well, that's probably because it's telling them that masculine energy rules over all. And if you're in your masculine energy, then you will get to be the have power over everyone, essentially. And that's kind of what I'm speaking to, is that there's this extremely toxic form of masculinity that can grow from that. And it can
Mhm.
also grow in women. And this is then where we see, and I think a lot of people have had this experience where, you go into really religious circles. And again, this is a generalization. It's not true for everyone. There are I know some people who are extremely religious that are wonderful humans. But in a lot of religious circles, they are the most gossipy, like bitchy people I have ever met. It's like I don't feel safe for a second with these people because there is so much toxicity going on because they haven't had a mother to teach them. They haven't had the goddess to teach them. And so what you were just speaking to, Kate, is like there's a whole different line of mystery school teachings that come from the feminine that we have been robbed of. So not
Mhm.
only have we not really learned from the true masculine principle, we've learned from this, essentially this like the storyline basically goes that Sophia had a child, which is said to be this is like the Abrahamic gods. So Sophia had a child and she didn't like how he was acting, so she abandoned him and pushed him away. And so that is actually the God, this is the legend, that is the God of Christianity and Islam and Judaism and all of these different things. That is what he is based on, Yahweh, where it's this son that has been rejected by the mother, and so he hates women. And this is why he punishes everyone. And he says, women must be subservient and obedient to him, or else, you're cursed forever with the pain of childbirth. Like, so women are missing the feminine mystery school teachings. And both women, well, everyone is missing it. And then also everyone is missing the teachings from the true masculine principle. Instead, it's like this bitter God that like hates everyone. And is like, you have to prove yourself for me to even love you. So anyway, not sure how we got onto that rabbit hole,
Well,
but
this is a perfect way to segue into, though, of like, what are some of the faces that we talked about? Like, what are the faces of the feminine that we're talking about here when we're discussing it? And I know there's a lot, but what are some of the ones that you particularly touch on, especially in your teachings and in your course? What are some, or maybe it's even the ones that are like really near and dear to your heart? What are some of these feminine faces that women really should lean into for deeper, loving wisdom?
yeah, so there's a lot of them. And I wanted
A
to start
lot.
to teach this in two different ways. So I have one experience called Full Spectrum Feminine, where we spend a month with each of 12 of the faces. So we have time to really like steep in her energies. Then I have another course that's called Realm of the Dark Feminine, and this is now self-study. And this is where we focus specifically on the dark feminine aspects. And one of the faces I'll talk about because it goes perfectly with our conversation here is, how has the patriarchy twisted one of these faces? So one of them is the seductress. And when I was running Realm of the Dark Feminine 2 years ago, I think, when I was creating it, I asked everyone, like, which of the faces of the dark feminine are you most resistant towards? And the seductress was number one. It was like 95% of people said that one, which I was surprised. And because I had a lot of resistance towards the seductress, it's like, ooh, I want to be seductive, yes. But there was something about it that was really resistant to me. And when I really sat with it and went into the Akashic records about it as well, they were like, well, the seductress, the way that the patriarchy has sold her to everyone is that she's this, like, if you look up seductress energy, it will basically say you're a man eater. You are hurting and destroying men for your own pleasure. You are essentially like a con artist using your sexuality to harm everyone around you to get whatever you want. And if you look up the femme fatale, this is oftentimes what she will be referred to, and it's a woman who is using her sexuality or her sensual powers to bring a man to his demise. And so that's really what we think of when we think of the seductress, or that's an aspect of her that's sold to us from the patriarchy. So from the patriarchy's eyes, it's like this. okay, you want to be in the seductive energy because you want men to be attracted to you and you want to um feel sexy, right? And so there's to the patriarchy, we're allowed to be sexy because that benefits men. That doesn't cost anything. It doesn't scare the patriarchy at all. Just a little side note, like some of the other archetypes, like the mad woman, the divine mad woman, that's another archetype I teach in Realm of the Dark Feminine, where she's a creative genius, not the distorted version, which is also another way that we've seen not to be in our creative genius. That's a different story. Anyways, um, there are aspects of the of let's just go back to the seductress because there's like so many things I can talk about here. The patriarchy says this is okay for you to be the seductress. We want you to be this way. We love for you to be the seductress. But then women who actually show up in that as the femme fatale are so hated by other women, by everyone, basically. It's like they don't have anyone in their life, etc. And I sat with that and I worked with my team and I was like, what is it that's really here? Because this does not feel true to the feminine to me. This feels like, and I heard immediately that's because it's the shadow side of the high seductress. So I've kind of coined this new archetype called the high seductress that operates totally differently from the actual femme fatale energy, where we are utilizing our sensual and sexual energy, our magnetism. It's not even about sex at all in
Mm-hmm.
order to shift things and create miracles, basically, from our beingness alone for the highest good of all. And some of us might know people like this, for example, who hold this energy where it's like everybody wants to be around them all the time. They always have the best luck. Like the coolest things happen to them effortlessly. They're not trying, they're not like burnt out. They're just like enjoying and loving their life, and things always seem to go their way. And
Mm-hmm.
they're also incredibly intoxicating and magnetic. That's the high seductress. And it's like, it's a win-win for everyone. But we don't learn about that aspect of her. We only learn about, well, when a woman is in her sexual and sensual prowess, she's using it to hurt other people because there's still this aspect of like, there's no way that our sexual energy could be used for good.
Mm-hmm.
She's trying to take his money. She's a gold digger. So that's just one example of the kind of twist in energy. Another one that we look at in Full Spectrum Feminine, we start with this in January every year, is the Weaver. And the Weaver, and we learned about the Weaver in the Priestess training, but I teach her differently. Because again, when I'm looking at all of this, I'm looking at like, who is the Weaver from 5,000 years ago? Who is this archetype of the feminine and what is it that she's creating? So we're looking at in Full Spectrum Feminine, just as an example, we're looking at some of the visionary aspects of the feminine where she's really allowed to vision into worlds that like we don't see typically women going into now. It's like, oh, well, I could be, I don't know, like the vision is limited and people who are really visionary often are not celebrated. They're like, oh, she's just a dreamer, she's not going to do anything with that. Um, we look at the Venusian aspects, which for me, these are my hardest ones to embody because they have, or to go deeper into, because I have a lot of family programming around this from women being hurt for displaying their Venusian qualities, being really open and loving and compassionate and sensual and sexy. These are so, like Venus is feminine energy, and then they say like Mars is more masculine energy, like that famous book from like 1980 or something. Women are from Venus, men are from Mars or something.
Yeah.
Um, so the Venusian qualities are often a lot of the more like predominant feminine qualities that we're like, oh, she's really feminine, like she's in her Venusian energy. But there's the visionary aspects, there's the Venusian aspects, there's the like destroyer aspects. Because the goddess has creator, preserver, destroyer aspects to her. So does the Godhead. And so the destroyer aspects can be more like um Sekhmet or Kali, or I work with this as the liberator, where she's collecting our egoic stories. She's collecting the belief systems and eating the belief systems that are no longer supportive for us. The liberator is actually one of my favorite archetypes because it is present in every single realm of initiation, whether you're ready, whether you recognize it or not. She's the one who is when you're like, okay, I'm tired of being this way. I'm going to give this to you. She's going to transmute it so that I can become something new, so that space is created for something new to come in. Um, and like I said, so in full spectrum feminine, we do 12 of these archetypes. In the realm of the dark feminine, we do seven. The serpent priestess, the divine mad woman. The mad woman is a really interesting one as well. A lot of people are very resistant to her. The truth teller. There's so many. And when we're looking at the dark feminine ones, these are the ones often that face our patriarchal programming of the good girl, which we're all raised to be a good girl. Even if you think about how you treat your dogs, like this is so obvious that we can see the programming is still so deep, where it's like, good girl, if they act perfectly exactly how you want them to act, where they're not an inconvenience for us at all.
Mm-hmm.
Even if maybe it would be more fun for them to go, like the other day, I was walking a dog and he was just like he would always get out of the fence. The people I was watching this dog for, they had an invisible fence, and he would get out like every single day of the invisible fence. And I was like, bad, like you're like, he could get hit by a car or something, so I'd be concerned. But also like nothing ever happened. He was having a blast chasing deer when he would run out of the yard. And I just noticed like, wow, I'm like preserving these patriarchal beliefs with this dog of like, good girl, good boy. You did exactly what I wanted you to do. You didn't do what you wanted to do. You did what you were told to do. And we can think about how much that's impacted us. So a lot of the dark feminine archetypes directly oppose our good girl. And I always say like the good girl and the dark feminine can't exist together. You have to obliterate one of them. So most of us have obliterated the dark feminine and said, I'm going to be a good girl because that means that I can be approved. I'll be approved by more people. I'll be validated. I'll be accepted and I'll be loved. But the cost of doing that is that we sacrifice a part of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think just listening to you, I'm picking up on this, and it feels true for me, is that learning about the feminine and learning about how I have avoided or pushed away the aspects of the feminine, or of this kind of priestesshood teachings that you're talking of in my life, by welcoming it back in, it's not just healing me. It's not just bringing more self-compassion in for me. It is transmuting in how I parent. It is transmuting in how I take care of my dog. You are correct, right? Like it is us opening our eyes to more about how we are existing in our day-to-day life. And I think that was like the powerful takeaway for me, and how I often relate back to what we learned in that year that we were in that program together, is often looking at like when do I need to call in that mother energy to really like so that I can surrender? Like how can I pass that on to this mythical being or this mythical identity of just saying like I'm surrendering, I'm trusting, right? Like I'm putting this out into the world and I am just going to trust. Like that's leaning into an energy versus like, and I think this was a big one for me, of feeling like I'm bad or that I'm rageful or I'm irrational when Kelly would come out at me, right? Which, like you touched a little bit on about the destroyer and the liberator. And I think this was like, Kelly was a really triggering one for me in the course. And it's because it made me come into relationship with my anger, but then also seeing how when we have anger, when we destroy, it creates space for something new. Like it creates that space for liberation, like you were just talking about. And so, like, for me, learning about the faces of the feminine and learning about this different way to interact with myself, it has led for me to open up different dialogues and different existence for those in my life as well. And not just my daughters, but my son, my husband, right? Like this isn't I think sometimes when we think about this work, it's like it's for females, and it's like, no, this is about healing something that has been energetically damaged in all of us, and how can we create more space and compassion, and how can we weave this new wisdom or this new thinking into our life. I don't know if you would agree or disagree with that, but that's kind of how it's landed with me in my life of becoming a practical, tangible, something that I can think about tool in my life.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, like we have to, it's like we have to fix everything. It's like our masculine energy is toxic usually.
Mhm.
It's like workhorse till you die. But the masculine's original programming is to protect the feminine, is to serve the feminine. This is where, like, in our society, we can see that the feminine isn't being protected at all. There's still some of this programming within the family unit of like the dad will protect his wife and daughter. But when we look at that on a larger scale, where is the protection for women's bodily rights? Where is the protection? Like, just as an example, so many things just in the recent months have come out about femicide, which is women being killed for being women, by their husbands or by other random men who follow them home at night, whatever, things that men don't really experience because the world is a lot safer for men than it is for women. Even no matter, like, we can tell ourselves other affirmations and stuff, but when we look at the reality, it's like, there was just in the news a woman who she was, I'm gonna get this wrong, maybe she was like Miss Switzerland or something like that. Her husband literally blended her up. He killed her and then put her in a blender. Like, women don't do that, and when we look, sorry, I should have said trigger warning to anyone listening. It's very, very sad. And we don't see men speaking out about this. We don't see men, I don't see any white men speaking out for what's happening in Palestine. We don't see men protecting on a bigger level. That is actually their role. And that's why a lot of times women are like, I'm so exhausted. Like, I'm having to do the protecting for the masculine, but we also have to remember that's internalized within us. We have both. So there's a healing of our masculine energy and our feminine energy. But for women, not in all cases, but in I would say like 70% of the time, we're trained to be more masculine to survive in a patriarchal system. So we have to work on first bringing more feminine energy in, and that can also show us then where we're operating from more toxic or unhealed. Toxic is kind of like a mean word, like unhealed masculinity, because we haven't had real role models of either.
Mhm.
So when we start with our feminine energy, it's kind of like that is the majority of our work as women typically. And then there's a whole other thing that comes after that of the integration of both. Um, but yeah, it's incredibly powerful work that affects everyone around us
Mhm.
in a positive way.
So as we kind of circle here to come to a closure in this session, which I'm sure we could talk forever about, I always like to end these calls with like a womb-led tip, like some kind of like tidbit of information that helps women to identify or to be curious about what they've learned in the episode of that they can have a practical tool in their life. And as we go into that, I just want to like just preface here that if everyone's like, well, how does this really apply to me? Like, this is just from my perspective, okay? And I'm sure, Aly, you have yours, which maybe goes into your womb-led tip that you want to give today. But for me, it's like this is this is the work for us to begin to heal our cycle as well, right? When we talk about our menstrual cycle, and when we talk about perimenopause, and when we talk about, puberty or any of these transitional periods in our life, when we look at the amount of hatred that we hold for our body, or how much shame or how much disconnection we have from our health and our wellness, and how much disconnected we are from our menstrual cycle, this is the work, right? Like you and I, this whole discussion was around a different kind of framework, but this this framework is what will help heal a layer of that's going on in your cycle, right? Like that shame that you hold and so forth. It links back to this denial or this rejection of the feminine in your body, or a really unhealed masculine energy in you, right? And so this exploration, for me at least, this is my truth, is that healing my body, healing my relationship with my cycle, healing how I'm feeling about as I transition from motherhood into perimenopause, which is a lot of setting boundaries. It is a lot of that Cali destroyer energy, somewhat of like, everything's about to change in my life because it no longer serves me and I'm not doing it anymore kind of energy. Like, this is when I lean into these teachings because I feel like this is the missing piece. This is the spiritual piece that we can bring back in to how we begin to work with our wellness and our healing. Like, this isn't just like some mythical thing that we read about and we can walk away from it and then we don't think about it again. Like, this for me, this is more of how we can deepen this relationship to ourselves, which will then deepen and heal our cycle and help us ease into transitions. So, with that being said, Aly, as we conclude this call, how would you like to leave some little tidbit of information? How can women integrate this into their life? How can they use this to find more balance, to find more peace, more power, to really identify with who they really are deep down inside?
Well, as you're asking this question, I had this image coming up in my mind of a room. You could also imagine this as your DNA, but we'll say a room because it's easier. A room with a like dozens of light switches. And you might have four of those light switches on, meaning four of your DNA strands are on. But there's like 100 other switches in this room that are turned off. All of these different aspects, which we've talked about just a couple of them in our podcast here today, all of those that are turned off are aspects of our psyche. So like you're talking about them as teachings, which is absolutely true. They are teachings, but they're also like parts of ourself. So if we have four switches on and 100 off, we know four parts of ourself and not 100. The other 100 we haven't even met yet, right?
I
For
love this.
reasons. Yeah. And so then we think about the tangible question we can ask is all those 100 have been demonized or made wrong. So maybe the next time, um, well, you can just ask the question, where am I not in reverence for a particular part of myself?
Mm.
For example, like rage. Maybe you judge yourself hard. We've been taught really deeply to never be rageful, that women are not supposed to be angry. And this is backed up by other patriarchal women. And it's not our fault that we can be patriarchal women and we've learned this way until we shift into what I call ancient femininity. So when a part of you comes up that you're like, oh no, I can't let her out of the bag. Or I don't like this part of myself. I don't want anyone to ever see her. Even in the past, this could be aspects of us that are like weird. Like now it's cooler to be weird or to be unique, but like 50 years ago, that was not a thing, you know?
Yeah.
So bringing it to its shortness, this isn't an hour long. Like think about this room and all the light switches that are off. And how can we turn on one at a time and how we get to know each other? We get to know ourselves so much more with every light bulb that we turn on, with every switch we turn on. And it's actually a part of our DNA, like literally. We have
Mhm.
entire strands of our DNA that are they call them junk DNA. And scientists say that we're using such a very small percentage of our brain capacity and our ability. And I think if we look back at ancient times, there's of course no proof for this. There's nothing that our current society would tell us or show us about this. But in ancient times, people, their spiritual advancement was 10,000 times where we're at today. Everyone was telepathic.
Mhm.
Now it's like I know like two people I can communicate with telepathically, and it's like not advanced at all, Like, well, one person it is, but this is we're very we're not nearly as advanced as we think that we are. So when we see all these DNA switches that are turned off, just ask yourself, how can I be in reverence towards this? Why is it that I feel like this part of me shouldn't show up? And here's the real question I want you to sit with. Where am I looking for validation from other people outside of myself to make something about me okay?
Mm,
And that's a big question because it's probably everywhere
I
because
love
that's what we've
this.
been taught. So,
I love this. That analogy is so amazing because, yeah, I could see all the places. I could see all the places that are turned on and turned off, but I can also see all the places that were turned off that I've now turned on in the past 3 years. And that to me is like, oh, my heart's just growing with joy of that thought of just like, holy, when I think about it, like 3 years ago, those aspects of me were dormant and I would not allow to be out. And
yeah.
how it feels so different in my whole body. So, and this goes back to the whole idea, people, mind, body, spirit, they are not separate, right? And I think this is where I get kind of like, I don't want to say cringy, but I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this word. The word spirituality, I always kind of cringe at because I'm like, how do I use that, right? Like, what does that mean to me? Because it doesn't mean religion to me, right? But for so many people, it does mean. And so this is where like one word can mean 100 different things. And in the context of what we're talking about today, spirituality is really about linking our wellness, our wholeness to our soul's path, right? To what's deeper ingrained inside of us as our inner knowing, not something else that someone else has predetermined for us. So Ali,
Mm.
thank you so much for this conversation. It was so good. I could talk to you about this all the time. I always learn something new from you, and I totally appreciate you. I love you. But yeah, thank you for coming on today and sharing some of your wisdom with us. And before I forget, you have something launching. You have a course launching soon.
Yes. So, like I said, I have two different courses that really go into this. I also, if you guys want like a taste of more of my work, I have a whole YouTube channel. There's a playlist called Ancient Feminine that you can, there's probably some videos with Kate there. I have all sorts of stuff on my YouTube, so you can watch more stuff there if you want. And then if you're ready to like, okay, I really want a space to practice this because yes, it's about learning. Yes, it's about remembering, but we also legitimately need spaces to just like practice being in this with other people that are doing the same thing, that are celebrating it, and that it's safe for us to talk about whatever it is that comes up. So I've created those spaces because I'm like, we need them. There's not enough of them. So Full Spectrum Feminine is what's currently launching. So I don't know when you guys are listening to this, but we run January 1st through December 31st. It's a whole year. And this is a monthly curriculum type thing. So we're not like doing deep work every single day. However, energetically, it is going on every single day. So every month we go into one phase of the ancient feminine, and it correlates with the astrology of what's going on. It correlates with the season, if you're in the northern hemisphere, of what's going on. It correlates with the energy of what's happening in that time frame, even just like I'll move things around based on what's happening collectively. So energetically, these archetypes, these faces really are intertwining with what's happening for us tangibly based on energy, astrology, seasons, all these other things. And so I do a video teaching of each face of the feminine. I'm an author. I have a book and I will write many books in my lifetime. And I do these really in-depth guidebooks that teach about how we actually are applying these faces of the feminine into our life. Then I also am an oracle, so I do Akashic record readings and I mean, sorry, Akashic record journeys with each of these faces of the feminine. And then there's other things as well that are included, like different bonus stuff. Sometimes I'll have some of my friends, like Kate or someone else, coming in to do bonus teachings. We also, if you can do this as a self-study program, but it's better to do it as a group. I take it back because some people have done self-study and they're like, that was everything I needed. And other people really want to have the sisterhood aspect, which I think just brings so much more to it. And if you're in that, we have a Voxer chat going all year and we have a sister circle once a month. So that's what Full Spectrum Feminine is. That starts January 1st, but we're filming this in late October. So whenever you guys are listening, there might be different deals going on, or early bird might still be available, it might not. So if you're interested, I would just look at it now while you're thinking about it so you can get the best deal possible if you can. But we start January 1st. And the other one is Realm of the Dark Feminine, which is shorter. This is self-study. You do this on your own pace. And I also do a mentorship that's one-on-one with this if you want to really go deep into it. But you can also just do the self-study on your own. And that's where we look at 7 archetypes of the dark feminine. And that's a really juicy, phenomenal program as well that just really works with you for the whole year. That one in particular, it's like you learn these different things, and then it's always shocking to me that like a year later or 2 years later, I'm like, whoa, like I can see that this archetype I've mastered in a different way to a different level. And there's like 1,000 levels of mastery. So we do one at a time. And it's just like, wow, I can, like Kate was saying, like I can see these lights that I've turned on. And it sometimes happens so subtly that we don't even notice, like during the process, until there's something kind of big that shows us like, wow, I reacted really differently to that than I would have before. Or anyways, so those are 2 things I do. I also do Akashic record readings as an oracle. And you can check out all my stuff on my website, alywilkins.com, or follow me on Instagram at ally.wilkins, and it's ALY, and also at Ancient Feminine.
And I'll have all of those links for you guys in the show notes below, as well as the course links. So thank you again, Aly. It was so great to have you on here today.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun, as always.
Friends, have you had a chance to download my new free ebook? Maybe It's Not You, The Truth on PMS and How You Can Take Back Control of Your Cycle is now available. This is truly a book that I think needs to be in the hands of every woman who struggles with the second half of their menstrual cycle. So if this is you, click on the link in the show notes and download your free copy today. And remember to subscribe to this podcast and share a review if you loved this episode. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.